thank you for that amazing introduction. I don't even know if I can live up to that. But that was great. And thank you so much for having me, actually. It's a real treat to have this audience. And thank you for getting up at time this afternoon. So I'm going to go through talking, and those of you that were at the Best Asia thing somewhere, I apologise that you may have heard of some of this before, but at least you know when to laugh. And so forth. So I can set those jokes up early. This talk is based on some research that I conducted earlier this year and will be published by the Canadian government and the Canadian public broadcaster called TFO. Canada did quite well in the sort of PISA rankings and the OECD thing, the sort of unelected Olympic Committee for Learning. They did very well, I mean, they went second or something like that, but they also realised that PISA isn't really worth that much. It's sort of a league table that isn't that valuable to the future. What they were interested in is that they were aware that we are living in interesting times, as they say, and as a government, their responsibility is to prepare and equip current and future generations to thrive in this transforming world. The interest was, what does that transforming world, what might it look like? What might the challenges be? What's the good news? What's the bad news? How do we plan for the future? And that's where this research comes from. So this is going to give you a quick whiz, about half an hour, if you can stand that, to go through them, and then we have some time and we have to answer any questions. So a little bit about me, what I tend to do, what I do for a living is what I call anticipatory research and foresight. Because you can't actually tell the future. There are people there is a job title called futurist, also from charlatan. And I say that with my tongue in my cheek, of course, but the thing is that the future doesn't exist. It's not a place. I think in times when we hear a lot from technology companies and economists and so forth, we believe our future is determined for us, that somehow technology determines us. Oh, this technology thing's happening, therefore we must change. This economic thing's happening, therefore we must change. Actually, as human society, we have agency. Technology is just a part of it, just another activity, it's another part of human activity. We have agency to decide how that's being used. So I don't believe the sort of futurist arguments who will put lots of graphs up saying processor power will do this, and this will happen, and so forth. But what I can do, and what I do for a living, is I study social, political, and technological trends and economic trends and try to anticipate what the future might look like. And from that, try to help guide organisations and governments in how to prepare their populations. And it's that simple, really. Antonio Gramsci, who was he wrote this in prison, actually. Antonio Gramsci was a sort of political social theorist. He was put in prison in Italy, and he wrote this from prison during the time of Italian fascism. And he called this time in the 1930s the interregnum. And what the interregnum, cool word, took me a little while to figure out how to pronounce that, is that the new cannot be born because the old has not yet died. What he meant by that was that the old, the status quo, has not yet died, therefore the new cannot be born. And because actually those who have benefited from the status quo have no motivation for change. And so they do their best to hold on to the status quo. And yet, the world is changing around you and the new is emerging. Now, during that time, morbid symptoms appear, is what he said. The time of monsters. Anybody read the newspaper? You had a visitor, didn't you, in Southeast Asia recently? Yeah. It's troubled times, isn't it? I live in England, once part of Europe. So we are, I believe, we're in our own interregnum. It's funny, isn't it? Less than 100 years. Very similar. What's happening, and we'll talk about those. So there's going to be the beginning of this, some sort of slightly dystopian stuff. But stick with me, because I am an optimist. We are on the precipice of what the World Economic Forum calls the fourth industrial revolution. And because we've had, that implies we've had three before, the first being the steam engine, second being factories, mass industrialization. The third was when we started getting, desktop computers and PCs and networking them and all that kind of stuff. And each one of those changed things. We adapted. As part of our human activity, we adapted around those revolutions in terms of how society operated and so forth. We weren't determined by them necessarily, but we adapted around them. And each time there were sort of winners and losers and so forth. And the fourth industrial revolution is indicated by the rapid technological emergence of things like artificial intelligence, automation, robots, self-driving vehicles, gene editing. There's been some amazing stuff that's been going on in that at the moment. Neuro implants, so that we can start talking to each other brain to brain and brain to computer and all this kind of stuff. I mean, some of this stuff is worrying. Some of this stuff is exciting. Diseases that we thought would never be cured will be cured. The struggle of labour will change. There's a lot of reasons to be super optimistic about this revolution. However, we can look at the past as well to predict the future. And there will be, in addition to these exciting new employment opportunities that we don't even know what they are yet, there will be challenges. Challenges around things like technological unemployment. And that's happened if we look at all the other revolutions. There has been technological unemployment. I mean, when the cranes replaced the dock workers, it took a while, 2-3 generations, before they found better jobs. And sometimes we gloss over that, and we forget that in those revolutions there were times of mass unemployment and depression. And if we look back at the last century, we saw that. The difference this time around is we're doing this at a much larger scale. We're doing this at internet scale. What you'll hear in entrepreneurship and business is exponential organizations. How Uber, for example, can go from zero to the biggest transportation company without owning a single vehicle in 5 years. So we're doing this on a very large scale, very, very quickly, and it's affecting everybody, the interdependence of us. So there are these sort of significant challenges, which we'll talk about. Also, while we're delivering the bad news, there's existential challenges. Now, this is different. The children that are in the schools that you're looking after, I think 84 schools, those children are going to face these challenges. Guaranteed. Doesn't matter where they live in the world, but especially here. Climate change, population growth, antibiotic resistance. Technological risk is when we do something stupid, and we will. But we can try and prepare. This is what you do. I mean, this is why what you do is so vital, so important. To give you an idea of what that looks like, this is some most recent information that's come from the UN. The brown and dark brown represents the nations that are less likely to easily adapt to climate change. The green and light green are the ones that are more likely. This is based on a number of factors. It's based on education, availability of access to education. It's based on GDP, gross domestic product, how much money you've got, and also geographical location. Curiously, it doesn't look good in the global south. Well, that's news, isn't it, really? The global south has always got a bit of a raw deal, to be fair. But this is very worrying, particularly around here and around here. But also when you compare this to population growth, the biggest growth in population are also happening in the same areas. This population growth is taking into account the figures I showed you on climate change and antibiotic resistance. So the African continent, for example, where a lot of my family are from, it grows from 1.2 billion, as it is now, to 4 billion people this century, in the time that the children that are in the schools that you look after will be alive. 4 billion people in a situation that is intolerable. Now, what that means is that the very latest figures were published by the UN just last week, that by the end of this century there could be up to 1 billion refugees. At the moment, there's about 40 million. And we know that when, the problem in Syria, when only 4 million refugees, there's 4 million of our family, really, were trying to find a home, things went a bit crazy. Shut the borders, let them drown, build walls, and so forth. I'm not sure that's a great strategy. So this is the really bad bit of the talk. But, I use this one in here because this quote is in fact not true. They never said, Houston, we have a problem. What the actual quote was, Houston, we had a problem, because it went round the moon. Yeah? And what it was, they had a problem and they fixed it. Education, the stuff that you do, is what fixes this. It's vital. I mean, that sounds hyperbolic, but you have to really, why do you do the job that you do? It's because of these challenges that we face. And it's not all bad, but it can be bad if we don't put in some work. So we talk about future of work. There's a number of aspects that are change. And automation and AI and all this stuff is going to have a profound effect on employment. And I'm putting these up because there are lots of big companies that are paid lots of money to come up with this sort of stuff. I don't necessarily endorse any of these companies, and certainly not McKinsey. Well, because they're an industrial manufacturing consultancy, they don't know anything about this century, and I think it's very worrying to take consulting from them. The last one was interesting, actually. This guy, he's a funny guy, actually. I know him, Darren. He said they did this report in like 6 months before that, saying, yes, the future's great. There's going to be lots of new jobs, no worries. And then they actually thought they'd look at the research, actually looked at real data, and said, actually, no, we were wrong. We're screwed. And it's this problem, They'll work for free, won't they? And if you're an industrial capitalist of the sort of 20th century variety, it's great, isn't it? Because like labour, human labour, that's expensive. Get rid of that. But it creates a problem in society. And this is a sort of the ultimate kind of the end of that industrial capitalism, is where you have 8 men, 5 of whom work in the technology industry, that own as much wealth as the bottom half of society, the same as the bottom of society. I think that's a crime, myself, really, crime against humanity, because this means that the majority have less so the minority can have more. Personally, I'd rather have a less wealthy world and more equality, because I think that equality creates problems. It creates challenges. A lot of the things that we see happening around the world, the atrocities that happen, I think are related to these kinds of things. So how do we look at that in different ways? Because the impact of social inequality and the income, of not having income security. So the British in the UK at the moment, we'll talk about the best employment figures since the 1970s. The problem is no one's earning any money. It's like 0-hour contracts, like for Uber or for Deliveroo or the gig economy, where you don't know. I mean, you've got a job, but you don't know whether you're going to get any work. And that can be problematic if you don't know how you're going to feed your family. And also, when we were in the second industrial revolution, we were thinking about the inhumane nature of work. Now we're thinking about the inhumane nature of not working. So there's some issues around that, because what tends to happen is that as Guy Standing from University of London wrote in 2011, this is a while back, nothing to do with recent events, he was identifying a new social class of people called the precariat. They're the people that have lack of social agency, lack of participation in society because they don't have meaningful employment. They've lost their voice, and this income security. The precariat become politicized, and so then start showing an interest and an alignment with extreme populist politics, particularly of the right. And we're seeing that. We've seen that in Europe recently. We're seeing that in the United States. We're seeing it. We're seeing it in lots of different places. The blaming of the other. So one solution that's been proposed, in the 16th century, it's not new, was the idea of universal basic income. This was Thomas More in Utopia. If those of classical education would have read that, to an antidote to crime. And it turns out that of the universal basic income schemes around the world, and there have been many. They've all been popular. I mean, there was one argument. It's like you can't just give people money, because the idea of universal basic income is to give everyone a stipend that pays for their shelter, it pays for education, it pays for food and utilities and so forth. Just not to be super wealthy, but to be able to operate and choose and have some self-determination. A colleague of mine suggested this could be like a national venture capital program. Because what it does is it stimulates economic activity. So whilst it sounds like we're just shelling out some free money, it's actually stimulating the economy. It improves access to education, it improves self-determination. Demands on the state for things like healthcare go down because people are living better. Crime goes down, child murder. So it's a sort of win-win situation. I'm a big fan of universal basic income, but this is a global debate. It's not won yet, but I suspect this is going to be part of our children's future. And recently working in Canada, and Kathleen Wynne, when they launched a scheme in Ontario, was saying, this is a scheme to look at the challenges presented by the modern world. And she says, from technology to Trump, it's a time of uncertainty, time of change, the interregnum. But going back to the 1930s again, I think it's always worth going back in time. Maynard Keynes was a progressive economist. He believed that the economy belonged to the people, the economy worked for the people. And that in doing that, once we've mastered the economy, then we would not just think about the purposes of labour, but the purposes of life. He was a bit of ahead of his time. And there are other economists that we can talk about, but I think that's an interesting one. But we do live in this sort of, I mentioned futurists earlier, this tyranny of experts, don't we? Very bad, pointing to what new jobs will emerge and whether we'll be equipped to do them and whether it will produce adequate incomes. But here's a clue. The jobs of the future are the ones that machines can't do. There you go. That's all you need to know. Done. And to work that out is if anything's based on rules or can be measured, it will be automated. And there's all kinds of things. And I think the idea that this was just manufacturing jobs is false, and we know that. So if accountancy, law, all these kind of what we thought of as white-collar jobs will be placed by some sort of artificial intelligence, some sort of machine. And this notion that, easy, just get all the kids to code. No, by the time the kids in your school leave school, it'll be the automation of automation. There'll be robots writing code. Yeah? So there's a whole bunch of those things. So it sounds dodgy, doesn't it? Oh my God, let's give up now. No, we don't have to. Because, actually, for now and for quite a long time into the future, robots are rubbish. And AI is rubbish. For a lot of things, right? For a lot of things, they don't do a very good job. Okay, so here comes the good news. Okay, I don't want one of these, look at this. Don't give up the day job, eh? So, these are three areas, and you'll see this picture emerge as how we can start thinking about how we design our education systems, because that's what you guys are about, right? Great opportunity actually in this country. I think this country is fabulous because, you go to Singapore and stuff. They decided to kind of, culturally homogenize everyone. The great thing about Kuala Lumpur, if you don't mind me saying, and I'm an outsider, is that you have all this diversity. That is awesome because actually diversity is where innovation comes from. Really, it does. And particularly in this world, because obviously if it's homogenous, then it's a robot. If it has this sort of stuff, it's not. So creative endeavours. I'm not just talking about painting and art, although that's part of it. But I'm talking about creative writing, entrepreneurship. There's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur. We need entrepreneurs, don't we? We create new possibilities, new opportunities, and all this kind of stuff. Nothing wrong with entrepreneurship. Scientific discovery. Computers don't make inventions. Humans do. We think of a problem that we want to solve, something that means something to us, something that means something to our community, something that means to the planet, and we work together to solve it. Machines can't do that. We can use the machines, we can work with AI to do that, but they don't do that. Social interactions, anything that requires emotional intelligence. We're going to come back to that one in a little while. Teaching. There is a whole group of people that think teachers could be replaced by computers. Good luck with that. And actually, anyone's tried to watch a robot climb the stairs will realise they're not very good at this. Thousands of years of evolution means that we can hike up mountains and dance and swim. We can do that. So these are some areas. There's probably some more. So this brings us to this whole idea, doesn't it, of like what is school for? Why? Why do you do your job? Why do we, when our kid's 5, hand it over to the school? Why? And I've thought about this in the book that I wrote, but I went all around the planet. I stayed in refugee camps. I went up mountains after an earthquake in China. I stayed out in rural Bihar. I went out to San Diego, went to the office of Google and everything else. And I came up with the idea that I think the purpose is to equip children with the knowledge and skills to meet the challenges of their generation. The stuff around them. How do we equip them for that? Or a better way of looking at it is how do we design an education that equips them to thrive in this transforming world? Lots of challenges. It all sounded a bit grim, didn't it, at the beginning? But we plan for it. Schools. How do we do that? The problem, though, and it is a challenge, and you must face this challenge every day. And I think you alluded to it in your opening. We have an education system that is resistant to change. It's like we're goldfish in a goldfish bowl. We can't see the water. We know we must change, but we can't change. There's lots of reasons for that, and I'll talk about those in a second. But one of the reasons is we're basing our education on what's known as the Standard Model, which is a model that was refined at the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, which was education was about the inculcation of facts and procedures. So those facts and procedures would be established, created by a panel of experts or a government or whoever. And the teacher's job was to deliver and insert those facts and procedures in the heads of the students. And then along would come the measurement industry, who would measure the students. Can you remember everything that the teacher has told you? And so not only was the student being measured, but so was the teacher. And so was the government. Who owns the measurement industry? Commercial. Big commercial, multi-billion-dollar industry, measurement. And it worked brilliantly for the last century. It was like a big human computer. The British Empire had something to do with that, because what we wanted was lots of identical clerks all around the world that could do mental arithmetic because they didn't have a smartphone. And they could remember loads of stuff because they didn't have access to the library. Times have changed. So we have this model of education called instructionism, which is direct instruction, and it's all based around that. Because it's designed for an industrial economy, designed for an economy where what we actually wanted was, empires and so forth. I'm not a self-hating Brit. I quite like being British some of the time. My mother's Moroccan, so I can, just in case. To create compliant factory workers, compliant office workers. That was what we wanted last century, really. And now, with the changes that I've talked about, that's going to change, isn't it? We are currently having an education system that trains kids to compete with machines, which seems a bit daft, seeing as machines are good at what machines do and humans are good at what humans do. Maybe we should think about that. And there's this idea now, I've heard this so many times, like teacher-proof curriculums. Seriously, you can go to any ed tech trade show. All governments come out with stuff like that. Teacher-proof. We need teacher-proof curriculums. We don't want the teacher. Insane. And these photographs of different parts of the last 100. You see, how many times have you seen this? You go to an ed tech trade show and go, "Classroom of the future." It's not, is it? It's 21st century technology delivering 19th century education. Because it's instructionism, isn't it? I own the books and I own the test. It's like the tobacco industry, isn't it? So it's like teaching to forget. Okay, so we're going to do a thing now. Right, I want a couple of volunteers. We're going to do quadratic equation. Who wants to go first? We have a mathematician. No, it's okay. We're not going to do it. Thank you, though. Give her a round of applause for being game. My point is that of all of you, only one person wasn't scared, right? Because if I'd have gone round and said, right, you, or you know, the reason is I couldn't do it either, because actually it was not that important to me. And there's a lot of that stuff that we're learning that isn't really being applied to anything, and that's a problem, I think. And actually, particularly because that broadcast format, sort of what I'm doing now, is also competing, particularly young people, it's competing with other broadcast formats, isn't it? You know, like Snapchat and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. So broadcast probably not that good. How do we engage kids, and how do we do something that isn't for a measurement system from a bygone age? And then looking at EdTech, you know, it's all got a bit rubbish, hasn't it? Now, I am a fan of EdTech, but I'm just saying there's a lot of EdTech that's really bad, and you have to spot the phony. If you're putting stuff into your schools, make sure you're spotting the phony. Because this is based on the idea that if education is instruction, then computers can improve instruction, and therefore we can replace the teachers. But what you end up with is like this conveyor belt, because that child can carry on walking, yeah, and go a bit faster, but it still gets to the same destination. That test from the 19th century doesn't prove anything. It doesn't prove what they can do, their skills are, and so forth. And so we have to be careful. Not all tech is like that, but a lot of ed tech has become this digital instructionism, and I'm a bit worried about that. And it's also dominated by the same textbook manufacturers that want textbooks to be scarce and therefore to charge you money. All of you went to university, probably spent a fortune on books, but information wants to be free, doesn't it? So how do we change to that? And the reason for that is education is a market. And as a market, it's second only to healthcare as the world's biggest. $6.3 trillion by 2020 per annum, because we're not running out of kids. We're actually making more, hopefully. We're having a good time. Don't worry, it ends in tears. I've got 4 of them. Anyway, but anyone care to guess what a third of that cost is? Teachers, qualified teachers. Right? Imagine if you could get rid of that, how much money you could make, get rid of the teacher's computer. There are businesses, I kid you not, there are governments, I kid you not, that think that's a good idea. In times of austerity, we can reduce that cost. This is a horrific idea. Trust me, this is not like Uber. We're going to come to that in a little while as well. The other third is infrastructure. Schools, playing fields, places that encourage learning. You can get rid of that as well. You know, maybe just give all the kids a smartphone. There's people that think that. You have to be very careful. So what I'm saying is that we're aware of the perverse incentives of an industry that is based around measurement and textbooks. Now, I'm not saying all instructionism is bad. Please don't misunderstand me. What I'm saying is that why can't we change? We know we have to change. Why can't we? Because we have this structure and we have this collusion that operates amongst parents, governments, and so on. Because like when my daughter comes home and says, I got an E in math, it's like, we have to talk. And she goes, hey, I go, well done. We collude around these things. But actually she's not doing math, she's doing calculating. Because math is much more fun. Now, if you know, Uberification of teaching. People sort of think, we know what Uber is, right? You do that on your app and your car turns up. And what Uber does is it's the human, the driver, is the interface between the machine and the mobile phone. The mobile phone just gives it instructions. Off I go. And of course the idea of Uber is to ultimately replace the driver with a self-driving car. Now that actually probably is a good idea, actually, because driving is quite dangerous and, blah, 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 so, And some people think about, well, what about we've had the self-driving car, what about the self-driving classroom? People think that's a good idea. And so this company, owned by a book publisher, who'd have guessed? Pearson, and Also with investment from the World Bank and also investment from Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates, the sort of vulture philanthropists, have this. So whereas we used to teach, we used to invest in teachers, like 4-year teaching degree, that then got reduced to like 1 year, a good degree in 1 year. But at least you learn about learning theory and understanding how children learn and a bit of child psychology and a bit of practice. That's been reduced by organisations like Teach for All, Teach for Malaysia, Teach First, that sort of stuff, which means actually you just have a good degree and they give you a 6-week burger flipping manual for kids and you could be a teacher. That's not very good either, in my opinion. This, you don't even need a degree. You're just like a high school graduate, that can read. You put them on a 2-week course to show them how to switch this tablet on, how to download lesson plans, and then they sit in front of 30, 40 kids and read it. Even tells them when to rub the board. Now, this is not made up. There's a whole, this is real, this is happening. This is happening over 600 schools on the African continent and on the Indian subcontinent. This company has opened up an office in London. They've opened up offices in America. They're opening offices in Southeast Asia. And the idea is to provide what they call affordable learning. And the way they do affordable learning, but still making a profit from the bottom of the pyramid, is by removing teachers. Because ultimately, get rid of the teacher. And they have very bad infrastructure. I mean, I could show you photographs of the schools they're in and so forth. So be careful of this, because if we just say that education is about measurement, then we get this, is my point. So instructionism is thriving, isn't it? Because we talk, a good talk, don't we? Every conference we go to, every government, you talk critical thinking, higher order thinking, collaboration, creativity, right? Huh? Why can't they talk to each other? Why can't they take their mobile phone into the examination room? Why can't they take their laptop? This is nonsense. This is not the real world. So let's ask some kids, shall we? Because it's like I'm a bit old.
My name is Forrest. I'm 16 years old. I'm going to school in Tooting. I'm doing A-levels at the moment, and I'm studying English literature, film studies, psychology and biology.
My name is Anukas. I'm 16 and I go to school in South London studying chemistry, biology, maths and Spanish.
When I'm older, I want to be a screenwriter and maybe a director. In a way, I feel like my teachers want to set me up for that, but then the curriculum doesn't really allow them to. It's all about passing an exam, and a lot of it is just how to answer a question on how to analyse a film, or how cinematography is used in this film, not really how you can use cinematography to make a film, or how you can use the mise-en-scène to make a film. I think if I designed it, I'd kind of make it about how to make a film and then how you can learn from other films that are made.
I feel like sometimes school is kind of like the lock and key theory. It's quite like everything is one way. In actuality, every child is different. So to teach every child in the same way, give them the same curriculum, and give them the same examination styles, not really correct.
School just kind of teaches you to pass exams now. It doesn't really teach you for what's beyond that. Or they teach you how to get into university because it looks good for the school, not necessarily because they want you to go to university.
Recently they've been changing the exams and they've been changing them to apply knowledge. The pass rate was 14% out of 100 and they were so shocked at how low it was, but it's because they don't teach you how to understand it.
I don't feel like a lot is done to help kids who aren't very academic because they just want you to do well in exams. They don't really care much about the people unless they talk to the people a lot. And even then I feel like a lot of those kids then go to college because then they can just choose one subject that they enjoy. So I don't feel like secondary school especially is really set up to help people who aren't academic.
You basically have to rip the school system apart and rebuild it again. I mean, you would have to give more independence and trust to younger people. I feel like if you give someone responsibility, in the beginning they may not be the best at it, but they will, we all learn to adapt as humans and we will pick it up. And I feel like if you give more responsibility to a child, they'll actually do something with it, but it's the fact that you're telling them they can't is what makes them not want to do it.
I feel like teachers should have more freedom in what they want to teach, and students should be able to have more of a choice in what they want to learn. And I feel like they should teach you how to live a life as an adult when you have to live by yourself. It's not just your parents' role to teach you that. If you're at school for more hours than you see your parents. They need to be teaching you how to live life as an adult when you don't have your schooling system anymore.
So, some wise teenagers, I think. Now, talking about thriving in a transforming world, this is interesting. This is the longest running longitudinal study of humans to understand what leads to a long, healthy life. How do we thrive? And we used to think the key indicators were about having a good job or a good education or going to the right university, live in the right part of town. But it turns out from this research that the single key indicator beyond many, in a long way, is good relationships. Yeah. Good relationships with your significant other, good relationships with your friends, good relationships with your families. This is what keeps you living longer. This is very important. Very little in our education system works towards that, does it? You know, we have a competitive education system. We don't do this. So this is, as an aside, this is very important, isn't it? About good relationships. How do we get on with each other, both within our communities and further? It's very important, I think. And also, the way forward isn't about inventing something new. This is old. Frederick Froebel, the inventor of the kindergarten, he cottoned on to the fact of having kids in rows at sort of 3, 4, 5 years of age, and rote learning probably wasn't that good for them. You know, they liked exploring and making things and so forth. And almost certainly didn't realize that 200 years ago he was designing an education system that would be perfect for 21st century learners. So the good news is a lot of the things that we need to do already exist. And in fact, good teachers already do them in many ways. And this is based around something called the creative learning spiral. This is how we learn, actually. You can take it back to your own self, or those of you who have children and you'll have seen this. Froebel created Froebel's gifts, like building blocks, those little wooden blocks and all that kind of stuff. So the way it sort of starts is that, children imagine a story. It could be writing, it could be with building blocks. Let's just say it's building blocks. We're imagining building a tall castle on a hill, kings and queens and horses and all this stuff. So we're imagining this and then create it with the blocks. We start building it. You've seen kids do this. You've done this, haven't you, when you were kids, right? All that sort of stuff. You play around with it. Hey, yes, the peasants are revolting. British. And then we share it with our friends, and they come along, and Paul gets in there and goes, "No, that's rubbish, Graham. How about that?" "Oh yeah, oh, fantastic." And we play, and then we try and build this thing because we're competitive, right? So we're building, and then it all falls down. We reflect on it. You think, Paul? We could do it differently. We could build it differently. And then we imagine again, and then we start building it again. And that's how we solve problems. Now, I've given you an example of how kids do it, but this is how we do it when we get older. But we lose that when we get into secondary education and university and so forth, because we get so focused on remembering facts and procedures and not learning how to learn. But learning how to learn is something we're born with. And we encourage in kindergarten. What we need is a lifelong kindergarten. And so what I'm talking about is something called constructionism. So constructionism was coined by a gentleman, my mentor actually, the reason why I'm here. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, a guy called Seymour Papert, who was a student of Piaget, who, along with Vygotsky, talked about constructivism, social constructivism. And this was about learning as a reconstruction rather than a transmission of knowledge. Learning by discovering, learning by doing, learning by making, situational learning. If I want to learn Malay, I could sit there on a computer or in a class. My name is Graham. It'd take me ages. Much better if I was learning physics in Malay, because it'd be situated, wouldn't it? And that works. I did some work with some in Norway, looking at how kids learned English as a second language, as a foreign language. And it was interesting, actually, that the kids that were best at English were the naughty guys, the bad boys, and they were boys, at the back of the class. Do you know why? Because they spend all their time on Call of Duty, playing video games. And the lingua franca in those video games was English. Now, they had a very colourful version of English, but nevertheless, they were really good at that. And this is about that whole situated learning, that learning by doing. And we know that's true. We know, intuitively we know that's true, because that's how we learn, isn't it, after we get unshackled from school. So it's this sort of thing, and in technology we have these sort of, this is the thing about EdTech I was telling you about, is we sort of got this idea, the computer-aided instruction. Anyone old enough to remember that? Absolute nonsense. But this idea that, education is instruction, therefore we improve instruction through a computer, we automate it, and that's how we get the computers to do the instruction. And we can also get the computers to do the testing. And that's how you end up with that nonsense I showed you earlier with the ubification. Or the alternative is actually we can use, as teachers, we can be designers of learning experiences and use technology. And technology can be anything. It can be plasticine, it can be Lego, it can be a skateboard, it can be a piece of a computer, it doesn't matter. To create ways to help children learn more and learn better, and learn better ways in ways that stick. And that's just the difference. So this learning by making, and we hear a lot about STEAM and STEM education. Now, they're the most misunderstood terms, I think, in education right now. They're buzzwords, they're things that politicians put. STEM, yes. STEAM, yes. It's not about, science, technology, engineering, arts and maths. It's not about separate silos. STEAM is about when you mix it all up. We have this ridiculous curriculums at the moment where I do maths for an hour, whoop, I do physics for an hour, whoop, it's just crazy. Foolishness. If we create projects, allow the children to create projects, they'll learn all of those things, but in a situated way. That doesn't mean we don't have subject specialists, but it just means that STEAM or STEM curriculums, we need a new one that de-silos them. To give you an example, we're back to Indigo again. Now, conflict of interest, I consult for this company.
Every learner should have the opportunity to be inspired by STEAM. Science, technology, engineering, arts and maths is something that we hear about as a priority within education all the time, but also in the context of future employment and challenges.
When we're talking about STEAM education, what we're thinking about is merging those subjects together and creating interactive and interesting projects that are based in real-world events.
So I use my PyTalk to create new sounds for my music and to create new musical instruments. I was not looking forward to doing computer science or coding at school because I don't want to go into tech and I don't want to be in a tech company or be a code monkey. But through my music I discovered Python, and even though I'm not an expert or anything, I can do some pretty cool things with it. And I got an A in my GCSE.
So when I'm doing maths, I like to use the PyTalk to use the Wolfram application in order to solve stuff that maybe I wouldn't want to do manually because it would take too much time or it would be too laborious. And because the PyTalk's really light, I can actually take it to school and use it in lessons to type up my notes and then use that for revision material and so on. Instead of using like a bog standard PC, I just thought I'd bring the PyTalk instead because it's really cool.
We're on the precipice of what the World Economic Forum calls the fourth industrial revolution, with the arrival of artificial intelligence, automation, self-driving vehicles, and so on. So as educators, the question we must ask is how can we equip our children with the knowledge and skills to thrive in a transforming world? At PyTalk, we believe in the power of physical computing with our unique design of what we call a modular laptop. A platform supported by unique curriculum tools for teachers and learners that encourages experimentation with electronics and coding beyond the screen itself.
So it's a promo video, excuse me for that, but the point of that is the reason why I'm consulting for that and other companies for a living is because they excite me. because they provide a platform that isn't a closed computer. I mean, don't get me wrong, I use a laptop, I'm using one now, it's fine for that. But actually, this is the whole point about that, is to have social constructivism, where kids are making things. You put it in a prototype board, it carries on, you open the keyboard, you put it in there while it's still working, switch it off, put a light in there, work out how to switch it on and off. The reason you want to do that is because of how pixels work, right? So you understand that the digital world is a made environment, but also we all use physical computing. All of you have used physical computing today in your car, at home, and everything else. And this is allowing kids to use these platforms to figure out how to solve real-world problems. And as you saw from the girl there, Indigo, she was actually not at all interested in tech or code, or being a code monkey, as she said. She was interested in making musical instruments. So she was learning about mathematics, she was learning about coding, she was learning about electronics, but her motivation, her passion, was about making music. So for her, that was the entry point, to learn across the curriculum. So this is computer science across the curriculum. So I'm not suggesting throw away instructionism, of course not. You can't just give kids a whole bunch of stuff and say, get on with it. I mean, Sugata Mitra tried that, but, it wasn't quite as he told it. But, so you need a little bit of, you need some instruction. And good teachers know how to balance. Although they're getting increasing pressure not to do that because of the way the assessment systems work. But we need to balance this. Alvin Toffler wrote a book a long time ago called Future Shock, and he's no longer with us. He made this quote, and I think it's always a useful quote, this one. I mean, of course, he's not saying that it's not important to know how to read and write and count. That's not the point. What he's saying is the skill for the 21st century is knowing how to learn. And I think the problem is when we have a measurement-based system, when we have a system designed to output compliance rather than creative non-compliance, is we get a population that doesn't know how to learn. It's like, well, give me the information, because that's what I've had in my education system, give it to me. So what he's talking about is the survivor, the ones that are going to prosper, the ones that are going to thrive, are the ones that can learn, unlearn and relearn. And learning how to learn, I think, is the biggest thing that you can give a child. And it should be like something like, my generation, we didn't do much exercise, and so now my generation is getting all kinds of problems. We have to, it's like a chore to go to the gym. But if you do that early, so it becomes like brushing your teeth, it becomes standard, and that's what learning needs to be, doesn't it? We have an education system designed to really beat that desire to learn out of kids in a way. But we don't actually have to, because it's, we just have to develop that. And I think through making things and projects, things that are passionate about, is one way of doing it. So we're going to go through a few things that we can do immediately, because the measurement system that we have at the moment isn't going to disappear overnight. You do have the opportunity, however, to change it yourselves. This can be done through Saturday morning clubs, these kinds of things, where you design your own STEAM curriculum, create your own badges, your own accreditation systems, blockchain them and everything else. Because those measurement companies, when we talk about disruption, you hear that a lot in Silicon Valley, the disruption isn't about disrupting teachers. It's about disrupting the existing incumbents. There are companies that have been in business for over 100 years in education. They're the ones that disrupt. That's what I'm saying. So you have the opportunity with 80 schools, you can do your own thing and win. But so here are the 5 things you can do immediately, though, within the existing system. It's like, think about your practice. Those of you who are teachers, those of you working with teachers, balancing it between, learn a bit more of theory about constructivism and constructionism. How can you design things? Trust teachers. The reason we stopped trusting teachers was because we stopped investing in them. We wanted technicians. I mean, hang on. Teaching isn't FedEx. It's not a delivery system. And yet somehow it's become a delivery system, hasn't it? We need to trust them to be designers, not just delivery technicians. De-silo where we can. Try it. Even in the existing school, get do physics with a different language. Do language and maths. There's art and maths. Because it is. There's the same sort of thing. You combine them if you can as projects. It's great fun. Kids will love it. Also, you hear a lot. I'm sure you've had lots of people come in here saying, "Big data. The future is big data." It's absolutely not. Big data will tell you the what. It's very useful for lots of things. It doesn't tell you the why. Doesn't tell you about the child whose parents just had an accident. Doesn't tell you about how they're feeling on that particular day. Doesn't tell you about their unique passions and ever-changing interests, what they love, what they don't love, whether their cats just died. It doesn't tell you that. Small data is what's important in teaching and education. The relationship between people. It's a small data that's important. I'm not saying big data is terrible, but I'm just saying, if we just start believing everything from a dashboard and forgetting the person, it's a bit like when the satellite navigation takes you into a lake. Reclaim the language of education. Assessment is not the same as measurement. Assessment is not a spreadsheet, it's a conversation. If you want to know if your child is learning, or a child in your class is learning, talk to them. Sit with them, be with them. That's assessment. This goes back to Socrates. Reclaim the language is what I'm saying. And then the 4 P's of practice, give P's a chance. Sorry. So projects, I can't emphasize this anymore. It's and a project has to be not one, sometimes we get, we confuse what project-based learning is. Project-based learning isn't a recipe where at the end you get this thing. It's not like, this is like a Harry Potter, exactly. It's like a Harry Potter model you get from Lego. No, that's not project-based learning. The project-based learning is where you think, you say to the kids, right, create something that solves a problem in your life. Yeah? That's project-based learning. And you can set parameters, and you can be there as a subject expert to help them and coach them and be the guide on the side and all that stuff. But that's it. And passion. We saw Indigo there. Her passion was music. She couldn't even remember what Python was. Oh, Python. Because she was passionate about music. Peers. Learning is social. I'm very worried about this idea of kids sitting in veal fattening pens, looking at a computer screen. It has to be social. Everything is better with people, isn't it? Everything is, trust me. Play, it's not a bad word. Play is great. When we play, we learn. We play, we enjoy. We play, we're motivated. We're doing a project that's hard, but we love it. And we're doing it with our friends. We work harder. It's called hard fun, actually. But it doesn't feel hard. But we're really challenged. And so we can do this immediately. You can do this now. You can do this in your classroom tomorrow. And then think about these different frameworks for thinking, because there are multiple frameworks for thinking. There isn't one. What tends to happen, we get fetishes. We go, computational thinking is, yes, we have to do that. Computational thinking has been around for a long time, and it's very useful for lots of things. Creative thinking, scientific discovery and all these kinds of things, and critical thinking is important. And it's very difficult to be a critical thinker in a measurement-based society, in a rote learning society. But by golly, we do need critical thinking right now, don't we? We're reading the newspaper and wondering whether it's true or not. Yeah? We have to teach kids about critical thinking. And the nice thing about these 3 frameworks is you can mix them up and create combinations. I've come up with a couple here, mixed creative and critical. You get design thinking, quite useful, especially for employment and stuff, and solving problems. Critical and computational scientific thinking. So these are good ways of just, thinking about how we can encourage these ways of thinking, these ways of solving, approaching problems. And another thing about when you're designing learning experiences with any kind of technology, from plasticine to computers to skateboards or whatever you want to call technology, is when you're designing, think of these 2 things. Think of designing something that has a low floor and a high ceiling. Now what I mean by that is a low floor is something where a novice, someone that hasn't done it before, that isn't quite sure, can start and make some headway and get motivated. Right? Not so easy that it's stupid, but easy enough so that they get traction. But high ceilings, so that if they get really sophisticated and they get into hard fun, they can go large. So it's like Indigo going from the kind of button with an oscillator to going to a full-on Moog synthesizer. Next time it's on the stage with U2. Well, hopefully not, because they're rubbish. But you know what I mean. And wide walls is this idea of not limiting it in that way. And you can do this immediately. You don't have to get permission to do this, And I think finally this is like personalisation. Now, I have a little game that I do when I go to EdTech shows, and I do love EdTech, but I don't love bad EdTech. And I go around and I go all the ones that say personalised learning, and then I sit there and it's great, try it yourself, it's great fun. And I say, okay, Mr. Salesman, tell me, how does it personalise learning? And they tell you all this, like, well, what happens is it works out the way, what the child was having difficulty with, and how we think their learning style, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, and where does it get them? Oh, yeah, it gets them to the test. It's not personalised learning. Personalised learning is about understanding the unique nature, the unique talents, the desires, the ever-changing interests of your child. It takes a human being to do that, not an AI. AI is great for lots of things. I've been doing AI for 30 years. I can tell you all the good things it's for, but it's not good for that. So we have to remember there's a reason why person is in personalisation, and we need to keep it there. We don't need less teachers. We don't need less skilled teachers. We need more teachers. We need better teachers. We need different kinds of teachers, of course. We need to be able to liberate teachers to actually teach. This is one of the harder things to do tomorrow. And I'm going to finish with, this is a gentleman. The reason why I'm here is because of this man. When I was 17, I had blue hair and I listened to punk music. I drove this man around not knowing how famous he was. He wrote a book called Mindstorms, and he was the guy, he was a student of Piaget, and he was the guy behind constructionism. And for 3 weeks, he studied me and I studied him. And he had this idea that technology would profoundly change learning and teaching, and sort of 30 years later, I'm still waiting. But he was very passionate about the possibilities of technology to liberate teaching and liberate learners, not to replace teachers. And he was asked this question in a newspaper article in 1997. The 3 things that changes you would make if you're reinventing the system. And he came up with this. Do away with the curriculum. Do away with segregation by age. I've never understood why kids are streamed by year of manufacture. Do away with uniformity. There is no such thing as a standard child. There's no average. These are just some nonsense ideas. There's no average child. I mean, I would be classified today as neurodiverse. I'm on the autistic spectrum, in case you hadn't guessed. But when I was a kid, they didn't have the autistic spectrum. You were just naughty, so they gave you a slap. Do you know what I mean? But the point is that we're all on the spectrum, right? Spectrum isn't a line. Spectrum is a sphere. And we're all in it. There is no normal. There is no, we have an education system that's standardized because that's how we do industry and how we expand and how we make money. We are not standardized. The reason we survived as a species is because of biodiversity. Right? That's why diversity is so important. Why we shouldn't homogenize ourselves and try to homogenize ourselves. When we do, we get increased mental illness. We also forget how to innovate. As a species, we are going to have more challenges than our species has ever faced at any point in human history. We need our diversity. We don't need standardized human beings coming off the conveyor belt. So I stand by what he says. I agree with this. Thank you.